To understand black metal, you have to look past the aesthetics and see it for what it truly is, a slow burn evolution that eventually hit a flashpoint. It wasn't an overnight trend. It was a movement that developed through two distinct waves, shifting from an experimental subgenre of extreme metal into a fully realized and often dangerous subculture. In this video, we're tracing that lineage. We'll look at the first wave pioneers of the 1980s, who stripped away the polish of traditional heavy metal, and the second wave in Norway that defined the cold, nihilistic sound we recognize today. From its roots in thrash and hardcore punk to the modern fusions of blackgaze, we are breaking down the history, the philosophy, and the abrasive techniques that define the sound of the underground. This is the evolution of black metal. To understand black metal, we have to look at it not as a single event, but as a slow burn evolution that eventually hit a flashpoint. It developed through two distinct waves that moved the sound from experimental extreme metal into a fully realized subculture. The first wave took shape across Europe during the early to mid-1980s. At this stage, black metal was more of a descriptive term for bands pushing the boundaries of speed and satanic imagery rather than a rigid musical template. These pioneers were taking the aggression they heard in the underground and stripping away the polish. However, the true big bang of the genre, the moment it crystallized into the cold, atmospheric, and distinct sound we recognize today, didn't happen until the second wave. This erupted in Norway in the early 1990s. This was the turning point, where the genre moved away from its thrash roots and defined its own unique musical language, focused on tremolo picking, lo-fi production, and a stark, nihilistic worldview. But where did this sound actually come from? Black metal is essentially a hybrid. It evolved from a jagged combination of early thrash, death metal, and hardcore punk. If you trace the lineage back even further, you find the influence of the new wave of British heavy metal and early English punk rock groups like Discharge. These bands provided the blueprint for the extreme musical approach and the confrontational aesthetics that the earliest pioneers would eventually adopt and darken. It was this mix of punk's raw energy and metal's technical extremity that ultimately gave birth to the genre. The roots of rebellion. Black metal didn't start as just music. It was a hostile reaction to modern secular culture and Christianity. It stood against political correctness, consumerism, and globalization. The philosophy. The genre traded societal mundanity for individualism and ethnic paganism, obsessed with the wilderness and the ancient past. In 1990s Norway, this radicalism turned violent, leading to church arsons and murders. The first wave pioneers, Venom, Bathory, Merciful Fate, and Hellhammer, established the raw, lo-fi aesthetics that defined the early sound. The Norwegian second wave. This is where the distinct black metal lifestyle was cemented. Bands like Mayhem, Dark Throne, and Burzum defined the true Norwegian black metal sound that remains the genre's blueprint. The shift to mainstream. While the early scene fought to stay underground, the late 90s saw a shift. Dimmu Borgir and Cradle of Filth introduced higher production values and more commercial sounds. Modern reach. The genre continued to evolve, eventually reaching a global audience through American bands like Death Heaven, who popularized the, quote, blackgaze fusion.
When we talk about the sound of black metal, we're talking about a deliberate departure from traditional musical warmth. The genre is defined by fast tempos and relentless blast beat drumming, often paired with unconventional song structures that defy standard verse-chorus patterns. What makes the guitars unique isn't just the heavy distortion, but the technique. Players use fast tremolo picking to create a texture that is often described as thin and brittle. Instead of relying on low-frequency bass for weight, black metal achieves its sense of heaviness through abrasive density and a cold, piercing atmosphere. This is further emphasized by the genre's famous lo-fi recording quality, a raw production style that has become a hallmark of the movement. The core instrumentation remains the distorted electric guitar and the drums. On the kit, you'll hear a constant, monotonous double bass beat, or those signature blast beats. Interestingly, the bass guitar is rarely a lead instrument. It's usually buried low in the mix, or simply follows the guitar lines to add subtle depth. To fill out the sound, many bands incorporate electronic keyboards or synthesizers. These aren't typically used for melodies, but rather to create a thick, swirling cosmic atmosphere in the background. It is also important to note that the poor recording quality is often an intentional choice. These lo-fi techniques are used as a tool to ensure the music feels cold and remains intentionally unappealing to mainstream listeners. Finally, the vocal style prioritizes distorted textures and malignant deliveries over any sense of melodic harmony. You won't find traditional singing here. Instead, the genre is known for high-pitched shrieks, screams, and snarling rasps. There was also a very specific droning style, often referred to as croaking, which is designed to sound demonic, corpse-like. While you might expect deep growls given the extremity of the music, they are actually quite rare in true black metal. The goal is always the same, to sound as harsh and otherworldly as possible.
The history of black metal is best understood through its key players. The first wave pioneers were the ones who initially established the raw aesthetics of the genre. This group included seminal acts like Venom, Bathory, and Merciful Fate, alongside the gritty, experimental sounds of Hellhammer and Celtic Frost. At this stage, they were defining the edges of what extreme music could be. However, the definitive black metal sound and lifestyle, the one that became a global phenomenon, was established by the Norwegian second wave in the early 90s. These were the bands that truly codified the genre's cold, atmospheric approach. Names like Mayhem, Darkthrone, and Burzum became synonymous with the movement, while groups like Immortal, Emperor, and Gorgoroth pushed the technical and aesthetic boundaries even further. In the early days, these artists were fiercely protective of their subculture. They actively strove to keep the music underground, ensuring it remained inaccessible and intentionally harsh for mainstream audiences. That isolation began to shift in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Bands such as Dimmu Borgir and Cradle of Filth began incorporating more commercial sounds and higher production values. Their approach brought the genre's imagery and symphonic elements closer to the mainstream than ever before. In more recent years, we've seen the genre evolve even further through fusion. The American band Deafheaven, for example, pushed the blackgaze sound, a mix of black metal and shoegaze, to significant global prominence. While the genre's roots remain firmly in the shadows, these popularizers have ensured that the influence of black metal reaches far beyond the Norwegian woods. As black metal matured, the core sound began to fracture into several specialized niches, each pushing the genre in a different direction. Atmospheric and symphonic styles. Some bands move toward a grander scale. Ambient or atmospheric black metal relies on slower paces and dreamy synthesizer textures to explore nature themes. In contrast, symphonic black metal takes a more maximalist approach, incorporating pianos, choirs, and full classical orchestral elements. The heavier fusions. On the slower side, we have Black Doom and its subset DSBM, which fuses high-pitched shrieks with the thick, crawling pace of doom metal to focus on themes of depression and nihilism. At the opposite end of the intensity scale is war metal, a chaotic and cacophonous fusion of black metal and death metal. Cultural and modern blends. Other branches look to history or modern melody. Folk, pagan, and Viking metal blend traditional instruments with Norse mythology. Meanwhile, one of the most significant modern developments is blackgaze, or post-black metal. This style fuses traditional blast beats and shrieks with the ethereal, distorted melodies of shoegaze and post-rock. Today, the genre exists in a state of tension between two distinct camps, the purists and the progressives. On one side, the traditionalists insist that the music must remain minimalist, lo-fi, and fiercely underground. To them, any deviation from the raw production of the early 90s is a departure from the genre's true spirit. On the other side, progressive acts continue to push the genre past its original limits. By introducing synthesizers, high-end production values, and cross-genre fusions, they have expanded the musical vocabulary of black metal. While the traditional core strives to remain non-commercial, modern fusions like blackgaze, popularized by bands such as Alcest and Deafheaven, have successfully moved into indie-adjacent spaces. This has brought elements of the black metal sound to broader audiences and mainstream critical acclaim, far beyond the confines of the original underground scene. Today, black metal exists in a permanent state of tension. On one side, you have the traditionalists, the purists, who believe the genre must remain minimalist, lo-fi, and fiercely underground to retain its spirit. To them, the shadows are the only place this music belongs. On the other side, the progressives continue to pull the genre into the light. By incorporating high-end production, synthesizers, and unexpected fusions like shoegaze, they've expanded the musical vocabulary of the extreme, reaching audiences that the original Norwegian circle likely never imagined. Whether it stays buried in the woods or continues its migration into the mainstream, black metal remains defined by its refusal to be comfortable. It is a genre of extremes, built on a foundation of rebellion that refuses to burn out. Thanks for watching. If you have thoughts on the purist versus progressive debate, or a recommendation for a modern band pushing the boundaries, leave a comment below.